following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello, I'm Carl Seidel, and welcome to The People's View. The People's View is sponsored by the Nashua City Republican Committee, and if you want to find out more about our operation and the programs we have, go to nashuagop.org. Tonight we have Representative Laurie Sanborn, and Laurie, you have a couple titles. One is the Business Caucus head,
yes,
for the representatives, and the other is policy leader for the Republican minority.
That's right.
Okay.
In the minority this
Very
year,
good.
yes.
Yes, this year. It was different last year.
Yes, it was very different last year.
Well, anyway, tell us about what you're doing with the Business Coalition, because I was on that committee with you last year.
You sure were, Carl.
It was nice.
Yeah. Well, as you know, I ran in 2010, and after I was elected, I looked around for a business coalition to join because a lot of us ran on jobs in the economy. That's why we ran for office. And I was surprised that there wasn't one. So I created the House Business Coalition. That's what we called it at the time. And it's nonpartisan, and it's a group of representatives who are very active trying to champion legislation that's going to make it easier for our business community to grow and hire and do well in New Hampshire. So we started that a couple years ago, and as you know, it was a pretty big group last year. We had 170 people, I think, at the height.
Yeah, I didn't know it was that many, but
there's a lot. There's a lot.
It was a good group,
yeah,
too.
It was a great group, and it still is. We've survived, and we kept going. We lost some of our members when we lost good representatives like you, but we gained some new people, and so we recruited right away, and now we have about 100 members, and we're growing every day. You know, it's interesting, so many people really do care about jobs in the economy and want to do what we can to help, especially the small businesses. You know, the large businesses tend to have their own lobbying groups.
That's right.
Some of them tend to have their own trade associations, but there's really no one out there fighting for them. And that's what we look at our role as, is really fighting for the backbone of New Hampshire, the small business owners, to make sure it's easier for them to operate.
I think that was one of the biggest things that I learned, too, how many small businessmen or women and just get stymied by the mechanism that is up there.
Right.
I mean, it's somewhat bureaucratic, and it's somewhat old-fashioned, I guess, in some ways or another. But I think we did at least make people aware that these are the people that are building the businesses in New Hampshire.
Absolutely, and you know, our motto, I don't know if you remember this, is you can't be pro-jobs if you're not pro-business.
That's right.
Because you understand that that's where the productive economy comes from. And you know, we have 44,000 LLC owners in our state. If every single one of those companies hired one person, we would eliminate unemployment in our state.
Was that nice?
Yes.
That's a nice
So it is
thing.
one job at a time.
Yeah.
And you know, in the session we both worked together in, we passed well over 50 pro-business bills. And many of them were not headline news, because these are not overly controversial items.
Right.
These are not partisan things. These are really problem-solving legislation. And I'll give you an example that created 8 jobs right away, and that was simply changing the definition of beer. And we didn't know about it until we keep a dialogue going.
Yeah.
All of the members of the caucus, as you know, go out to businesses and try to get feedback and input. How can we make it better? And one of our reps went out to, I think it was one of the beer makers out in the Rye Seacoast area. Now I'm drawing a blank on who it is. And they mentioned, well, we have this problem. The definition of beer requires that we have to box up and distribute some of our beers in Massachusetts as opposed to New Hampshire. And we thought, well, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So literally a one-line change to our legislation created 8 jobs instantly in the state of New Hampshire.
Great.
Yes.
Great.
So those are the types of things we feel really excited about. Again, no one wrote any articles about it, but that's okay because we know that we created jobs. And since then, that company has brought some, I guess, has done some economic development in the state and has actually built a new facility. So,
Oh, really?
yes.
Oh, that's
so
great.
So that's the type of thing we want
Yeah,
to see.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I know, too, regulations were always something that, you know, I think there wasn't a good communication between the people being regulated and the people doing the
Absolutely.
regulation.
That's a big focus of ours. In addition to reducing some of these excessive, crazy regulations that make no sense anymore, we also look at that relationship between business and government because it's so important. You can't operate a business without having a relationship with government. And, you know, we've seen some deterioration in that. And not because people aren't trying to do a good job at the state level, but sometimes the rules just don't work anymore or the processes. And so for a couple reasons. One is that we're not very modern. You know, our state is pretty archaic for many, many things that businesses have to do. They literally have to go to the website or call the agency and get a printout of a form. They can't just fill it out online right now. And they have to fill it out, you know, by hand with pen and paper, and then, you know, stick it in the envelope, put it in the mail. So just think of all the time and the energy and the money that's involved with that and how much more efficient we could be. And how frustrating it is because oftentimes business owners don't even know what the forms are that they're supposed to be completing. And we find over and over and over, businesses want to comply. They want to do the right thing. They're not trying to evade anything, but just finding the rules and regulations is hard. So one of the things we put forth in the last 2 years was called the Business One Stop.
Right.
Governor Lynch supported it. Governor Hassan has supported it. It's also supported again in this current budget. And because we need to give a little bit of money, just a little, to some technology. And they have been programming things so that if you're going to start your new small business, you can go online now. We have a friendly website it's under construction right now that will make it easier for you to fill out the forms online.
And find out what the forms are.
And find out what the forms are and the rules are and find out how many forms do I have to fill out. So we're working on those types of things and hopefully we'll get to see that unveiled more and more as we go forward.
Well, I hope so. That was one of the more frustrating things that I had feedback on from the people that I contacted, that they just couldn't tell what they had to do, and then they get surprised and sometimes even fined for not doing something they never knew about.
Right, and the fining thing is a problem. You know, it used to be, you think of state government as there as a service. I mean, we pay for it, we're the taxpayers. We pay for that service, so when you want to try to comply with the law, you want to call the state agency and get help. And what we were seeing for a few years was that the agencies were maybe getting a little overzealous going after fees and fines for the money. So we did a couple things, as you might remember. One was we said, okay, Department of Labor, if you go out and you find these businesses because they did something wrong, you can't just keep the money. So because I think they were incentivized effectively to go after and collect this fee and fine money. So this way we said, well, no, it goes back to the general fund. So then there's a little bit less of an incentive for them to go after. And another thing we did, because I think, you know, the whole point is to make sure we educate the community on what is required and help them get there and tell them why and show them the way. And so we decided in some cases, not when it had to do with employee safety or pay, but in minor documentation errors. If an employer made a mistake, there'd be a warning, they'd have a time to fix it, and then there'd be no fine. If they didn't fix it in time, okay, now there'd be a fine. But at least give people the information they need to fix the problem.
That's right.
You know, and that'll be something that we work on, I think, going forward, is looking at some of the laws and maybe even simplifying them even further so that we're not even in the predicament where there's a fine for something, if something that's so archaic and outdated. Right now, most employers, as you may know, pay biweekly. It's kind of the norm. And we have this antiquated law in the books that say you have to give permission to pay biweekly. You can only pay weekly. And many employers don't realize that you actually need permission. So, you know, that's something that, well, if that's truly the law that we want to keep, then we have to educate people that, and we need to make it easier for them to do such a thing. How does one get permission? And how does one have proof that they have permission? You know, all these questions start to come up. So we're going to work on some of those kind of antiquated things that may be more stringent than federal, maybe more stringent than adjacent states, and really maybe don't make sense so much anymore.
And getting the word out to the people, make sure that they know these things. It's very important. I know that one other thing that came up last year was that signing of timesheets.
Yes.
Especially when you have, well, construction crew, it could be any place, you know.
Right.
Well,
It's hard for them to come running back to the office
That's
when
right.
they've been in the field on a roof somewhere
Right.
all day in the summer heat,
Right.
trying to make it back to the office by a certain time to sign off on that timesheet before they can process payroll. Yeah, so there's some things like that that we could update maybe.
So that's what you're trying to get done for next
Yeah,
year?
those are the types of things, although there's also some business tax reforms. I'm really fascinated by tax law. And you know, people will say, well, taxes don't matter. Well, they do. If you ask any business, what you pay in taxes matter, and you want to make sure that it seems equitable and fair and that you're doing it properly. And you want to make sure that's really clear, and we want to make it as simple as possible. And we want to make it as competitive as
Right.
possible, because, you know, New Hampshire does not operate in a vacuum. We have to compete with other states. The Nonpartisan Tax Foundation has ranked us pretty low compared to other states in terms of our business taxes. So we have some high rates. So we want to make sure we help people whenever we can. And so you might remember we raised the threshold for filing our business taxes for the very, very small companies. So if you're thinking about opening that other coffee shop,
All right.
and you've already got a location now and you're thinking, wow, should I do it? Well, you may or may not based on some of these tax laws, because if you know, wow, there's a little startup break there for the small family companies, maybe I'll try it and see how I do. Then once you reach a certain threshold in sales, it's actually 200,000 now, then you start paying. But it gives people that little wiggle room to try to get going, put all the money back into the company, make sure it's going to survive, and then of course you pay taxes like everyone else.
The loss carry forward thing also
big
helped
one,
them
right?
too.
Again, that was making New Hampshire really uncompetitive. We were one of only 2 states in the entire country that had a cap on how much of your losses you could carry forward against your profits tax in the future. And we raised it, so we didn't go all the way. We didn't go as far as most states, but we raised it from a 1 million loss
Well, still kind of low.
to 10. It's still it's actually very low, especially when you look at like, you know, R&D companies, manufacturing companies, they have major cycles.
Oh, yeah.
They go through some good times, they go through bad times, but we want to keep them in New Hampshire. The way to keep them in New Hampshire is not with too many big upfront credits like some other incentives that some other states do, but it's by keeping them here even in the tough times. And by allowing them to carry forward these losses, it really does, because they know that we're here with them. We understand they're going through a tough time. When they're making money again, they'll
And that's
continue to
what
go back.
allow investors to get interested, to back
Absolutely.
them, to do some of that expansion.
Right.
And even these mid-sized companies who are going to make that big jump
Right.
with a new plant or something like that.
Right. And you know, we did something else that we've been talking about was R&D Tax Credit. And you know, talking to our friends at BAE, who's a major employer in Nashua, you know, this isn't for them really, because it's really not a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
But it's an important thing, and as we recruit new companies to come to New Hampshire, it's an important thing on the checklist. Do we have this credit? And it's small, but it's something to encourage this kind of research and development that's a lot of money up front, and give them a little bit of help along the way. They basically can take a credit against their taxes.
And
No, go ahead.
there are a lot of small companies too that do use that. I mean,
They
that's
are,
where they
and
get
BAE
started.
says they came and testified on behalf of the R&D tax credit, not for themselves, but for all of the little
suppliers,
sub-companies
yeah.
that supply them, absolutely, because there's a lot of them out there.
Mm-hmm.
And those are feeder companies that will grow someday, and maybe there are only 1 or 2 or 3 employees now, but that's the future. You have to, Google started somewhere, right? So, and so we'd like to see more of that. So we kept the R&D tax credit, but then we also decided to expand it. So it went from 1 million to 2 million. So that's, I mean, it's small, but it's exciting.
Small, it's getting there, but I hope we keep on going, because we got to grow those things along with the companies that we have.
Right. We got, you know, that's the one thing about New Hampshire. You know, I'm in the Ways and Means Committee, so we look at revenue that comes across from all different industries. And New Hampshire is pretty well protected because we have such great tax policy in general, saying that, you know, we have a constant, even playing field. Regardless of industry, you pay the same tax rate. Other states have played around with that, and so they'll incentivize, let's say, the film industry or a certain industry, and that can work for the short term, but on the long term, you end up having problems, because now state revenue is unreliable and inconsistent. And so we're finding that our state's very reasonable and level, because we're really looking at charging the same amount across all industries and across all sizes.
I think that's good. And we also have a variety of sources of income, too.
Yes.
which sort of rides out the
Right.
any kind of economic.
Some of those are hidden, though. Not a lot of people realize we have some taxes that we do. One of those, and this is an example of the type of thing that the Business Caucus would actually not support, and that was the beer tax.
Oh,
I don't know if you remember that. It was short-lived.
Very short-lived.
But there was a recommendation to increase the beer tax.
Sure.
Now, a lot of people don't even know that there's this kind of hidden beer tax, but it's in there, and it's one of our major revenue sources. And
we like
you know,
sin taxes.
yeah, I guess someone would call it a sin tax, but you know, even the governor quickly said, you know, this is not the right way to go. This would hurt consumers, and you know, our economy is doing okay, but it could do better. And you don't want to start taking all that money out of the economy, and it was going to definitely hurt the beer manufacturers and distributors, which we have a number of them in our state. We have this new nano brewery industry, which is growing and almost turning into its own tourism industry. You know, people are coming to our state to try our fabulous microbrewed beers. So, you know, so we didn't want to ruin all that. And the beer tax has been incredibly level. In the last 3 years that I've been looking at it closely, it stayed exactly the same. It's very consistent. It's very reliable. Why would mess with a good thing?
Yeah. You don't want Anheuser-Busch to leave either.
Exactly. So we fixed that, you know.
Okay.
So that's the thing. Part of what you do as a legislator, as you know,
Sure.
is you want to make sure you're not passing bad bills. And, you know, a legislator will bring forth what sounds like a great idea at first. But what we do is we learn and we try to figure out, well, what are the unintended consequences? And you hear, hopefully, from all sides, what did we miss? What did we forget? Who is this going to impact? Is this all rosy? Is this good for everyone? Or are we going to have a problem? You know? And so one of the things the Business Caucus has always done is not taken a position or not promoted a bill that would help one industry but hurt another.
Right.
So we've been very cautious about that.
That's good. That's good. Well, what do you have lined up for next year?
Well, we're just starting to do research now. We just finished, as you know, this week at the State House. So now we have a little extra time on our hands to really think about what's next. And of course, we want to stay the course in terms of making sure we're rolling back excessive regulations wherever we can. We want to continue modernizing the relationship between government and business. We want to improve that relationship also in the cultural sense, and maybe do some work with our new Economic Development Commissioner, who, as you know, is from BAE, our good friend Jeff Rose, and I'm excited to see what he's going to do. He's been quite busy, so we'll be working with him to see what ideas he has, and if he needs some help from the legislature, we'll be working with him on that.
We'll have to bring him on this show and see what he has to say.
I know, I can't wait. I'd like to come in with him. And so we'll continue those. We'll like to continue the business tax reforms as well. So we mentioned the R&D Tax Credit. It's a wonderful thing, but we've learned as we talk to business owners that it's a little bit cumbersome. The application process itself is difficult. And they don't know if they get the credit until much, much later. And that's a challenge because, of course, the whole point of a tax credit is to encourage people and kind of incentivize them to go in a certain direction. And since they have no idea how much of a credit they're going to get, it makes it harder for them to make decisions. So we'd like to try to look at that process and improve that so that it even has more mileage.
What kind of feedback were you getting from the companies about this scholarship program, which they would donate for scholarships to charter schools?
We got great feedback on that. You know,
so that's something they were interested in
doing.
They
loved the idea. You know, and I didn't ever hear them talk about it being a tax credit as much as they thought it was just, they liked the idea of being able to put their money in a place that they really cared about, which is education.
Yeah, right.
Absolutely. And,
Definitely.
you know, some people will complain that this is really anti-public education, and nothing could be further from the truth. This is totally about making sure that lower income families have choices in education and they can get the best possible match. And when we have great educational outcomes, we have great employees to hire. And we want to hire New Hampshire people as our employees, right? And we'd like to keep youth in our state. We talked about the aging of our population. We need to keep the youth in our state. We can do that with jobs, and we can do that with, you know, making sure our students have great education. Right. So this is a great way to do it. It's win-win-win.
I agree, and I don't see how this court decision is going to play. I hope they appeal that.
Well, I think it will be appealed.
I see there's no difference. You and I make a donation, our federal tax, you know, to something like that gives scholarships out. We get a deduction.
Right.
Why shouldn't the companies get a deduction?
I think you'll end up seeing
like
this morphing a little bit over time. Everyone says it needs to go to the Supreme Court, so I think it will, and we'll see what happens. You know, it's interesting because I did a lot of research on this, and for some reason it became a partisan issue in New Hampshire, and I honestly don't understand why. In most other states that I researched, It wasn't partisan at all.
No.
It was really a joint effort because it really was to help. Obviously,
Education.
wealthy folks always have school choice,
Yeah,
right? Of course.
right.
And this was a great design to make sure that we could get the business community involved, that it was a tax credit, that it wasn't, it was constitutional. We did all the research we needed to do to make sure it was not going to hurt the public school system at all. It's going to be a fail-safe system there. So we'll see what happens, but it's in the courts, so you know that can take a while.
Well, we'll see. Well, as I understand it, they're just not allowing the scholarships to go to religious
That is
organizations. Otherwise, the programs
Still goes.
and
Right.
while the appeal's being made.
Right.
So
And it still can
at
even
least
go
it gets
toward homeschooling.
yeah.
Because for some students, that might be the best possible match for them, and for whatever reason, they have a special need or a special family situation, and that will be fine.
Yeah, I've talked to a number of people that got homeschooled, and they really, I don't know how they do it. I had 4 children.
I don't know how they do it either, a lot of
I
work.
couldn't.
But there's also a cost associated with it.
Oh, yeah,
Because
sure.
there's books and materials and all that, and these folks are
And
still
you're still
paying
paying your
taxes. They're
taxes,
still paying their
right.
property taxes, so they're not trying to get out of anything.
No.
But really, it's every parent wants the absolute best for their
Well, and
child.
that's good for the future of the state. As you say, it keeps
Absolutely.
more people here,
Right.
it develops new things. I know I've gone to this one here in Nashua that is really a good school. I never saw so many people, teachers as well as children, that are enthusiastic
That's great.
about going to school.
That's great.
And it's just terrific. Well, tell us what else is happening in your other policy.
Well, so I wear another hat.
Yeah.
So, the Business Caucus, I really like to keep it nonpartisan because there's so much we can do coming together across the aisle.
People had an open discussion. That was very nice. That not as antagonistic.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be. I know we have 2 different parties, and we have a different philosophy. But hopefully, we do go to the State House to solve the real problems that people face. I mean, that's why we're hired, right? Hired.
Well, I hope so.
Right. But
That's
there
our
is a partisan
charitable work.
element, of course. We have 2 parties.
Right.
And for the last 2 years, the Republicans had a supermajority, as you know, in the House, and that changed.
Yeah.
We lost the majority, and now we're in the minority. And I'm the Republican policy leader. And so in that regard, we came up with an agenda of our top items, and we try to promote those bills, and we do it from the Republican
Platform,
philosophy.
yeah.
Right, exactly. So, of course, number 1 on that list is jobs in the economy. We want to do everything we can to improve the environment for businesses to operate. And maybe that's where, obviously everyone cares about jobs, but we're not looking at the government creating the jobs. We're not looking at the taxpayer subsidizing these jobs. We want private sector job creation, and we want the entrepreneurs out there to go figure out a way to do it themselves. We don't need to tell them how to do it. People are very productive. They have great ideas. We have very intelligent people here, great resources. We have a great atmosphere. So let's just get government out of the way.
That's right.
And then let them do what they do best. And if we let that happen, they will succeed, and they will grow, and they will automatically, of course, pay more in business taxes. So the revenues will come.
You're growing the base.
Right.
You're not growing the rate of taxes.
Right.
You're growing the base.
Right.
That's. Can you tell me why people don't understand that?
Well, no, it's just it's different philosophies on how to do it.
Yeah.
I think I like our tax policy here and I like the level playing field that we provide. We do have a couple little credits we talked about, but they're minor compared to other states. And I think the more, again, we can change the atmosphere so that when you call this, whether it's the Secretary of State to start a new company and what do I need to do? There's a friendly voice on the other side,
That's
and there's
right.
a simple, clear, well-defined process for you to follow.
Have you followed the Department of Justice and their phone system now for tying in all the courts?
I've followed it a little bit. I haven't seen it in action.
Use that as an example because
great
they
example.
learn so fast. But what we had to do in part of the legislature, we had to hold back some of the money to convince them to do it. But once they did it, they fell in love with it because it works so well.
Well, and that's another initiative I think we have is to make our government really good with the taxpayer money. And that means looking at where we can be efficient wherever possible. And it doesn't necessarily mean cutting jobs or anything like that, but it really means improving the services. That if we're going to be paying for this government service, let's make sure it's efficient and it's effective, that we're truly helping the people who need it, whether it's the business owner calling or it's someone who needs fuel assistance. It's so cumbersome sometimes to deal with government that people really get frustrated.
Oh, yeah.
And we can do a
Especially
better job.
if you're just trying to run a business at the same time and you don't have anybody else to do that.
Yeah.
You can't, you talk about having 2 heads, you have to have a dozen heads
Right,
sometimes
exactly, right.
to deal with everybody.
Yeah.
So it looks like you're all ready for another run next year.
I am. I'm excited that the year is over, but we have a new year coming. I mean, it's wonderful to get some major things checked off. We just passed the budget, and that's a major achievement. I was very nervous that we wouldn't be at this place right now, and I was concerned about that because the folks out there want their government to be working. They want their elected officials to get the job done, and I think there would have been a lot of disappointment in us if we hadn't gotten this very basic task. It's a big task, but it's a basic task done. It would have made us look like we're just fighting for fighting's sake. Not all of the budget is wonderful. Anyone can find things that they like and things that they don't like, but we did come together because I think that's what New Hampshire people want and deserve. And we try to solve problems.
We lived within our income.
We sure did. From the Republican perspective, we wanted to make sure that the revenue estimates that we used for the budget were reasonable and realistic, and we could expect to truly receive them, because we wanted to make sure we were going to spend within our means and not more. So that was really important. Now, the House started with their version of the revenues, but it was early. It was very early in the process, and so the economy got better. Revenues came in stronger. We also got some one-time money. So the revenue that we can look at receiving in this budget is higher. So that frees up some things. So we were able to restore funding to a number of things that we all care about: education, charter schools. We talked about that. Some LCHIP and some other programs like that. So it's nice to be able to do that. And of course, from the Republicans' perspective, we wanted to make sure we did it without raising a single tax.
Right.
And there's no new taxes in this bill.
Yeah.
And that's important. We want to make sure we can balance the budget, but not make it harder for you to survive.
We don't need new taxes, but we need to grow our base. Remember, right?
Right,
That should be our motto.
Because if we keep the tax rates reasonable and fair, and we reduce the regulations and make it easier to deal with government, more businesses will do well. Yeah. And they'll end up paying more. All boats rise, right?
We may even have something left over at the end of the year.
Well, and that Republicans would have liked to see us restore a little bit more money to the rainy day fund, because I just don't know what the future is going to hold. We don't know what the economy is going to do. We've got our fingers crossed that everything's going to go well, but we don't know the impact of the Affordable Care Act, and that's the big wild card.
We'll see that. That's the big one coming up.
Yep.
So thank you very much for
My
the time. We enjoyed it, and we're going to have you back again next year
when
we talk about more good things. Let's hope.
Great.
And thank you all for listening in. Remember that the Nashua Republican City Committee sponsors the program, and we have our meetings on the second Thursday of every month, except in July and August.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.